Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 351, The Spirit of the Beehive, directed by Victor Erice, 1973. Now, this is another favorite film of mine, but for completely different reasons. This was, and of course I think I've seen other films that are kind of like it, but this film stands out because this is the first time where I felt as if cinema can be poetic. Often cinema, typically most of cinema, what we see and what gets made and what is put out is narrative cinema, where it's basically you're filming a story, and everything is all dictated by the story. The characters are dictated by the story. The direction, the acting, the cinematography, the mise en scène, the editing, all those things are there to service and to tell a story. So, but I've come to believe in, and I thank the Criterion Collection for giving me this, that there is a range of possibilities in cinema. Cinema is a very malleable medium, probably more malleable than we tend to give it credit for. Much in the same way, like music is fairly malleable. Yes, for most people, they're exposed to a particular style and type of music, whether it's popular music, whether it's music that is made in a particular style or fits a particular genre or fits a particular time period or culture. But if you certainly, if you know anything about music, there's a lot more possibilities out there. There's musics of other eras, there's musics of other cultures, there's other styles, and there's just a range of possibilities, and it's by emphasizing certain parameters that make up music, because music consists of melody, harmony, rhythm, pitch, and timbre are the five basic components, and a certain music can emphasize some of those aspects more than others, or can take a certain aspect into a particular direction and form a new style, a new kind of music. So, but it all comes down to music, and music in its broadest definition is organized noise, or organized sounds, organized noise. And I feel that cinema is also just as malleable. It doesn't always necessarily have to tell a story. It can be a means of showing something else, and it can even show something that's ultimately indescribable. And when you try to describe it, it comes off more like poetry. And so I think of The Spirit of the Beehive as a example of poetic cinema. Now, what this film is more or less about, there is now this is not to say that it doesn't have a narrative, but the narrative is more subtle and more oblique. And I think the big takeaway is not so much the narrative; it's more the impressions that the images and the sequences of images would do. This is a story that's set in 1940 in a Castilian village. The Spanish Civil War was recently done, and so that means Franco is now in power. And in this village, the first thing that happens, there's a traveling road show, and it's a showing of Frankenstein, which, by the way, I've seen many years ago, and I'm not the biggest fan of Frankenstein, and mostly because I really enjoyed the novel. I enjoyed reading the novel. I like the novel more than I like the film. I understand why the film was made the way it was. I understand what people like about the film, what people get out of that film. I'm not particularly interested. I'm more interested in the novel, and particularly the ideas and the things that it addresses more than the film. The film is more straightforward horror that just uses the basic Frankenstein story. But the novel is much more interesting. But I digress. I will say that this film made me appreciate Frankenstein the film more. Made in 1931, directed by James Whale. Anyways, so there's this screening of Frankenstein, and these two girls, and one of them named Anna, played by Anna Torrent, sees this, and it leaves a profound impression on her. She finds it, she finds him fascinating and the whole thing fascinating. And it's at that time when it's before she becomes more aware of like the world around her, but she's still in that imaginative state where she's kind of building the world for herself. And that's kind of what you see is sort of her kind of figuring out the world in so many ways, and it lets her figure it out instead of adults telling us what she's thinking. It's allowed to happen, and then it's up to us to construe or to conclude what she finds. And it can be either very, very rewarding or very, very frustrating, depending on what your patience levels are, or what you can stand, or what you can put up with. With a lot of this, I would say really, really take the effort. Really don't. If you feel the need to dismiss it right away, don't. Because I do think that how to say this? I think it is important to broaden one's horizons, especially if you are somebody that likes to pride yourself into saying that you do. This is a case where you can put your money where your mouth is, or you can put your statements to the test. It's like, okay, you want to be open-minded, you want to broaden your horizons, you want to see something different, go see The Spirit of the Beehive, because that's fairly that's fairly unconventional. So again, ultimately it's poetic cinema, but what's interesting was that for its time, it was done to reflect a certain time, and particularly to reflect what was possible in Spanish cinema starting in the late 60s, I believe, or maybe even a little bit earlier, but then continuing on through the 70s. This is the time where Franco's regime was nearing its end. And now, interestingly enough, I find the films that were made in authoritarian countries to be a lot more interesting. The ones that are able to break out and they're hailed as interesting. And this is one of them. The reason being is that when you're in a situation where you have a oppressive regime with with no holds barred censorship, basically, it's censorship that's not afraid to use the scissors if need be. You can't be overt in your message. You can't grandstand. You can't stand on a soapbox. You can't just preach something. If you want to say something worthwhile, you have to come up with a way to say it, but have it go past the censors so that they will have no idea what it is that you're saying, and so you can kind of slip on by it. And that's largely how Spirit of the Beehive was able to kind of get away with it. It was so oblique in a lot of things, and there was not a lot of clarity in what it was presenting. That the censors thought that, oh, nobody's going to see this film. It's a mess. It's a bore. It's it's not very clear. I mean, who would be interested in seeing this? So we can't. I mean, how can we? Now, if it was very clear in its message, they know exactly what's going to get cut. But the more oblique or the more subverted it is, the more implications that are there, the easier it is to get by. And this has been true in a lot of other cases as well. It's happened in Poland. It's happened in the Soviet Union. It's happened in various places where a film has to go face to face with an authoritarian regime or a very aggressive censor board, and it's because you have to exercise that creativity. You have to find some way to get your message through, but at the same time not draw attention to the censors. Then you find all kinds of ways. That's when you start finding more interesting things, because there's a barrier, and you have to circumvent that barrier. This is, of course, the great paradox with creativity, that creativity thrives on freedom, but it also thrives when you have the right borders and the right parameters to limit your options. And by limiting certain options, you're paradoxically more free to try other things, to try new things. And that's what makes the spirit of the Beehive work. Now, there was that political motivation, but you would think that because it's of a particular time, and because it illustrated a particular point in a nation's history, you would think, oh, it's very limited. It's, it has this very narrow purpose, and then once you go several decades beyond that, it's not, like, who cares? Almost, like, who cares about all this? Franco's been long dead. Spain is, Spain is now a democracy. Of course, Spain is now going through its own problems, but for completely different reasons. So, like, what's the point of watching Spirit of the Beehive? Well, I think because of that poetic quality, part of what makes good poetry, and particularly, and this is more evident in more modern poetry, where you have layers of meaning, where there's what is said on the surface, and then there's the subtext. And I think it's the subtext is what makes the film still interesting. And it's not just a single subtext. It's not just the politics. It's not just the particular history. There's other things going on. Again, what you're seeing is how this child is seeing the world and is coming to understand the world, and particularly and especially the difference between reality and imagination, and she's also becoming more aware of a dimension beyond what you can actually see and experience, a spiritual dimension, if you like, and it's her trying to grapple with those ideas. And part of what makes Frankenstein so fascinating to her is where I think what she's trying to understand is how something that exists only on film can generate a series of emotions, and particularly empathy. How can you empathize with someone who really doesn't exist? That's one thing you can take away. There's other things you can take away from this as well, but that's just one thing that comes to mind. But it's a film that has it has a steady pace to it, but I don't think it's ever really dull. And there's some, again, I think it's best approached. It should be best approached as if you were a child, where you're just, you're there in the moment. You're trying to understand what's around you, so you're drawn to certain things, like I am right now. You're seeing things as they are. You're trying to make connections. You're trying to understand, and plus you have no background. That's the other thing. You have no history, and you coming to terms with everything that's around you. And there are things that are around you that do have a history. For instance, your parents. You know that they're there, but you're not really sure how they got there. And that's the other part of the mystery. So this is definitely a film that's more from her point of view, and that justifies a lot of the oblique characteristics in terms of the narrative. Not everything is spelled out, is what I'm saying. And in a way, that's a good thing. Certainly for this film, but I think in general, there's sometimes it's good to watch something that engages you and that it invites you to fill in the gaps and draws you in to try to. If you want to understand it, you have to do the effort, not have someone dictate it to you. And I would say that if you're somebody that feels that film is all about manipulation, and again, I don't believe that there is no film that doesn't manipulate you, but this is a case where a film manipulates you in a subtle way, and not in a very overt way. So it just kind of it sort of draws you into it, and it's visually arresting. It's fairly meditative and quite poetic. Actually, I remember the earliest. My earliest take on it, like we're reading the synopsis, and I believe I was right. I had the feeling that this would be similar to if Andrei Tarkovsky were to adapt To Kill a Mockingbird, and so just imagine his style and the things that he was interested in, but taking that story of someone growing up, who becomes less of a child and starts to put away childish things. But I don't even really see this as her in the end putting away childish things. I think this is just more about her kind of coming to terms with things, and it's an ongoing journey. It's just this one little moment that you see, and the catalyst that starts this exploration is Frankenstein. So I would say that if you want to see a cinema that's more poetic, and does it really well, then I would say definitely go for it. I know I like this, and again, I don't apologize for it. So and maybe you'll enjoy it too, but I also understand if you don't. But I would say give this a shot, give this a spin, as they say. So, The Spirit of the Beehive, and until next time, take care.